The station was massive. It floated in the dark space between two suns, far from any home world, far from any war. Its name was Nexus Orin, and it had been built by 6 civilizations working together over 40 years. It was the kind of place where no one was supposed to fight. It was the kind of place where everyone came to talk. And everyone came armed. The docking bay was loud with the sound of metal boots hitting floors. Warships of every shape had parked along the outer ring of the station. Some were long and sharp like knives. Some were wide and heavy like mountains. Every ship carried soldiers. Big ones, small ones, 4-legged ones, ones with too many eyes. They all wore armor. They all carried weapons. They all stood straight and tall and proud because that was what you did at a galactic peace summit. You showed your strength so that others would take you seriously. Rena stood near the window of the human docking corridor and watched it all. She was 26 years old. She had studied for 8 years at the United Earth Diplomatic Corps Academy. She had read every book, passed every test, learned 6 alien languages, and earned the highest marks in her class. And still, standing here now, watching the parade of soldiers and warships through the thick glass, she felt very small. She heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Dawoon walked toward her with a cup of tea in his hand. He was not a tall man. He had a calm face, short dark hair going gray at the sides, and the kind of quiet eyes that made you feel like he was always thinking about 3 things at once. He was 51 years old and had attended 11 peace summits. He was the head of Earth's delegation. He stopped beside her and looked through the window. "Big ships," Rena said, because she did not know what else to say. "They always are," Dawoon said. He sipped his tea. "The Vorath brought 6 destroyers," she said, "and the Sulek hegemony came with what looks like a mobile command carrier. That thing is bigger than some cities." "It is," Dawoon agreed. Rena looked down the corridor toward the Earth docking bay. Their ship, the UNSS Hopeful Dialogue, was parked there. It was a mid-sized diplomatic vessel, clean white hull, quiet engines, no weapons ports, no fighter drones attached to the sides, no soldiers standing in lines outside the ramp. "We look like we came to deliver mail," she said. Dawoon almost smiled. "We came to talk. There is a difference." Rena was not sure she agreed, but she said nothing. They walked together through the main corridor of the station toward the pre-summit welcome hall. The hall was enormous. The ceiling was so high that the lights at the top looked like small stars. Hundreds of alien delegates filled the space, moving in groups, talking in low voices, studying each other carefully. The air smelled like a dozen different things at once, something like smoke, something like ocean water, something sharp and metallic. The human delegation was small. Dawoon, Rena, their linguist Wusiak, their medical officer Bitna, and 4 other staff members. 8 people total. Wusiak was tall and thin with round glasses and a soft way of speaking. Bitna was a woman in her mid-40s with short hair and calm hands and a habit of sitting very still. She did not look like someone interesting. She looked like someone's quiet aunt. They found their seats at the welcome tables. Around them, every other delegation sat surrounded by soldiers. Guards in full armor stood behind ambassadors. Weapons glinted in the hall lights. The Vorath delegation alone had brought 20 soldiers into the room, all of them standing like walls of muscle and scale. Then the Vorath ambassador, Garak, noticed the human table. He was 7 feet tall. His skin was dark green and covered in small, hard ridges. He had a crest of bone along the top of his head that rose when he was feeling something strongly, and right now it was rising. He looked at the 8 humans sitting quietly at their table with no guards and no weapons, and he leaned toward the Vorath diplomat beside him and said something. The other Vorath laughed. The sound carried. Rena kept her eyes forward. She felt her face go warm. Other delegations were watching too. The Pelhari Collective, a species known across the galaxy for being deeply peaceful, still had 4 ceremonial guards standing behind their ambassador in bright silver armor. Even the small, bird-like delegates from the Muresi Compact had brought armed escorts. Compared to everyone, the humans looked empty. They looked forgotten. Garak stood and raised his voice so the whole room could hear. 8 people, he said in the common galactic tongue. His translator unit made his voice loud and clear. Earth sends 8 people and a cup of tea. He looked around the room with an expression that expected laughter, and he received it. The species that sends clerks to a warrior's table, every summit the same thing. He shook his great head and sat back down. Rena looked at Dawoon. Dawoon was looking at his tea. His face had not changed. His expression was still calm, still quiet, still as water with no wind. He picked up his cup and drank from it slowly. He does this every time, Wusiak said quietly from across the table, not looking up from his notes. Every summit, Rena asked. Different ambassador each time, same words. Wusiak turned a page. Clerks, delivery boys, paper soldiers, they have many versions. And we just sit here. We just sit here, Dawoon said pleasantly, and then we do our work. Rena looked across the hall. The laughter had faded. Other delegates were already moving on, already talking among themselves. The moment had passed for everyone except her. She felt it sitting in her chest like a small stone. The welcome ceremony began. Speakers from 3 civilizations gave long speeches about peace and cooperation. A Sulek elder performed a traditional blessing that involved clicking its mandibles in a complex rhythm. Dawoon paid close attention to everything. He made small notes. He greeted passing delegates with genuine warmth, speaking to each in their own language, something that surprised more than a few of them. Rena watched how their expressions shifted just slightly when a human spoke their tongue without a translator unit. Small moments, but she noticed them. Later, during the dinner break, Rena found a quiet corner and stood beside the tall observation window. The twin suns were setting behind the station's horizon, filling the stars with a deep orange glow. It was beautiful in the way that only very lonely places can be. She heard Dawoon's footsteps behind her again. "Why don't we bring anyone?" she asked before he could speak. "Not soldiers, not guards, not even ceremonial escorts. The Pelhari are pacifists and they still brought 4 people in armor. Why don't we bring anyone?" Dawoon stood beside her and looked at the stars. "We were asked not to," he said. "Asked by who?" "By the galactic community, a long time ago, after the first summit we ever attended." He paused. "They asked very politely. They said please." Rena stared at him. "They asked us to come unarmed and we just agreed." "The people who made that decision were very smart," Dawoon said. "Smarter than me. I trust the decision, even if I was not the one who made it." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It is not." He finished his tea. "Give it until the end of the summit. Things have a way of explaining themselves." He walked away. Rena watched him go. She turned back to the window. She stood there a long time thinking. Then her comm unit buzzed. She looked down at it. There was a message, short, strange, sent from an Earth frequency she did not recognize. It was not addressed to her. It seemed to have landed in her device by mistake. It contained a set of coordinates and 7 words. She read them twice, then a third time. "They've noticed again. Keep the lid on." She looked up from the comm unit. Across the hall, Dawoon was laughing at something a Pelhari delegate had said. He looked completely relaxed, completely ordinary. Rena put her comm unit away slowly. The stone in her chest felt a little heavier. The second day of the summit began with a problem. The Voreth Dominion and the Sulek hegemony had been fighting over the same stretch of space for almost 200 years. The Drevak Nebula, a wide and beautiful cloud of gas and light sitting between both their territories, held enough rare minerals to power entire fleets for a generation. Both sides wanted it. Both sides had bled for it. And now, at this summit, someone had placed them at the same table and asked them to share. It had gone badly before lunch. The Sulek ambassador, a tall insectoid creature named Verk, had stood up and called the Voreth claim a lie built on old maps. Garak had responded by standing up too, which was more threatening because Garak was very large. 3 Sulek soldiers had stepped forward. 4 Voreth guards had moved in response. The room had gone very quiet in the way that rooms do right before they stop being quiet. The summit moderator, a thin blue-skinned Pelhari elder named Oris, had spoken quickly and asked all parties to sit. They had sat, but the damage was already done. The mood in the room had turned cold. Oris looked around the table. Most delegations looked away. No one wanted to mediate between the Voreth and the Sulek. That was like stepping between 2 burning buildings and asking them to stop. Then Dawoon raised his hand. "We can help," he said simply. Several alien delegates turned to look at him. A few exchanged glances. Rena, sitting 2 seats away, watched Garak's crest rise slightly, not with anger this time, with surprise. "You," Garak said slowly, "you want to mediate." "We would like to try," Dawoon said. Garak studied him for a moment. Then he sat back in his chair and made a gesture with one clawed hand that Rena had learned meant, "Go ahead, this should be interesting." What happened over the next 4 hours was not loud. There were no dramatic speeches and no moments where anyone pounded a fist on the table. Dawoon worked quietly. He asked questions. He listened. He asked Wusiok to cross-reference the original survey maps of the Drevak Nebula from both sides' own historical records, and when Wusiok put them side by side, something became clear that neither side had noticed. The original borders had never actually been agreed on in the first place. They had each assumed their own version was correct and built 200 years of war on top of that assumption. The room was silent for a long time after Wusiok presented the data. Dawoon let the silence sit. He did not rush in. He did not try to fill it. He just waited, and the waiting was patient in a way that felt almost physical. Then he spoke. He offered a framework, not a solution, just a framework, a way to start talking about a solution without either side needing to admit they had been wrong. He built it carefully, using the exact phrases that the Sulek legal tradition valued and the exact kind of direct language the Voreth respected. He had spent the previous night reading. Verk and Garak did not shake hands. This was not a resolution, but they agreed to continue talking the following day. They sat back down at the table without their guards stepping forward. Several alien diplomats in the back of the room made quiet notes. Rena noticed. She also noticed that Dawoon ate his lunch the same way he did everything, calmly, without hurry, asking Bitna if she wanted more of the bread rolls from the center of the table. Back in the Earth delegation's quarters that evening, Rena sat with her tablet and followed the thread she had been pulling since the previous night. She had run the registration on the frequency that had sent the strange message. It came back as a standard Earth government communications tag, level 7 clearance, which was high. High enough that she could see it existed, but not high enough to see who sent it or why. She started searching something else instead. The 2251 Dawnbreak Accords, the first galactic summit Earth had ever attended. There was plenty of information, public records, history books, official statements. The summit had been described as a great success. Humanity had been welcomed into the galactic community. Speeches had been made. An agreement had been signed. Several civilizations had praised Earth's participation. But when she dug into the detailed records, the session logs, the delegate reports, the security assessments that other species had filed, she started finding holes. Big ones. Whole sections of the official summit record simply did not exist. Not redacted, where you could at least see a black bar where something had been removed. Just gone, as if the pages had never been written. She pulled up the Voreth delegation's report from the Dawnbreak Accords. Standard document, well archived. She found a gap of 11 hours in the middle of day 2. 11 hours where no Voreth delegate had filed any record at all. She found the same gap in the Sulek records, in the Pelhari records, in the records from 4 other civilizations. 11 hours, every delegation, the same gap. She searched for any account from any source about what had happened during those 11 hours. She found almost nothing. One academic paper from a Pelhari university briefly mentioned the incident at the first human summit, and then moved on so quickly it seemed almost deliberate. She found one more thing before she went asleep. It was a written deposition. Old, scanned from a physical document, barely readable. It had been filed by a Voreth military general named Hack, who had been present at the Dawnbreak Accords as part of the Voreth Honor Guard. The deposition had been submitted to the Voreth High Command upon his return. Most of it was missing, but one paragraph had survived. She read it slowly. The general wrote that he had fought in 11 wars. He had seen the armies of 9 civilizations. He had stood on battlefields where the ground was black from burning and the sky was thick with warships. He had never been afraid. That was what he wrote. He had never, in all his years of war, felt afraid. And then he described what Earth had brought to the Dawnbreak Accords, what their escort had looked like, what the numbers had meant when his people ran the military assessment overnight. The paragraph ended mid-sentence. The rest was gone, but the last line that remained was this: "We had fought wars for 800 years. We had never seen anything like what the humans brought to that room, and those were just the ones they let us see." Rena sat back in her chair. She read the line again. Outside her window, the twin suns were dark now, and the stars were sharp and white. Somewhere out in the docking ring, the warships of 60 civilizations sat in silence. Somewhere down the corridor, Dawoon was probably reading. Bitna was probably sleeping. Wusiak was probably working on tomorrow's translation notes. 8 people, no guards, no weapons. Those were just the ones they let us see. Rena set down her tablet and looked at the ceiling for a long time. She thought about Dawoon's calm eyes. She thought about the way Wusiak had not looked at his tablet once during the corridor walk that morning. She thought about Bitna, quiet, still, always sitting with her back to the wall and her face toward the door. She thought about the message, 7 words, a frequency with level 7 clearance. "They've noticed again, keep the lid on." She did not sleep well that night. In the morning she asked Dawoon directly, over breakfast, if he had read the general's deposition. Dawoon put down his spoon and looked at her with that expression she was beginning to recognize. Not quite a smile, not quite serious, somewhere between the two. "General Hack," he said, "yes, long time ago." "What happened at the Dawnbreak Accords?" she asked, "during those 11 hours?" He picked his spoon back up. "Eat your breakfast." "Dawoon." "Eat your breakfast, Rena." He said it kindly, without any sharpness, but firmly enough that she understood he meant it. "The summit is not over. There is still work to do." He looked up at her then, just for a moment, and something in his expression shifted, something careful and deliberate, like a door opening 1 inch and then being held there on purpose. "But you are asking the right questions," he said quietly. "That is a good sign." He went back to his breakfast. Rena ate in silence, thinking about an 11-hour gap and a terrified general and 7 words on a comm unit that had never been meant for her. The alarm went off on the 3rd day, just after noon. It started as a sound, a low, steady tone that pushed through every corridor of Nexus Orin at the same pitch. Then the lights changed from white to a deep amber color. Then a voice from the station's central system spoke in 12 languages, one after another, saying the same thing each time. "Cease protocol violation. Weapons discharge detected. Station lockdown in effect." The summit hall went from busy to chaos in about 10 seconds. Delegates stood up. Guards moved in. Soldiers who had been standing quietly in corners suddenly had their weapons in their hands. The large display screen on the east wall of the hall lit up with a live feed from outside the station. A Sulek hegemony warship, a fast attack vessel that had been parked near the station's outer ring, had fired on a Voreth transport ship. not a military vessel, a diplomatic transport carrying Voreth staff and supplies for the summit. The transport was damaged but still moving. The Sulek warship had pulled back, but the shot had been fired. The Cease Protocol, the agreement every nation signed before docking at a peace summit, the agreement that said no weapons would be discharged within 50,000 kilometers of the station, had been broken. The station locked down all docking exits. All corridors moved to restricted access. The summit hall sealed itself. And every delegation's military escort activated. It happened all at once, like something practiced. Soldiers moved around their ambassadors in tight formations. Weapons were raised but not aimed yet. The hall, which had always been tense in the quiet way that a room full of enemies pretending to be polite is tense, was now tense in a different way. A louder way. A way that felt like standing on ice that was starting to crack. Rena stood up from her chair. She looked around. The Earth delegation's table was very open. No soldiers, no guards, no armor. Just 8 people standing up from their chairs and looking at the chaos the same way anyone would. Dawoon was already moving. Not running, walking, but with direction. He guided the group toward the east corridor, away from the main floor where the largest military groups were clustering. Rena followed, staying close to Wusiak, who had put his tablet in his bag and zipped it shut. They moved into the corridor. It was quieter there. The amber lights pulsed slowly. 3 other delegations had also moved into the same corridor, the small Muresi compact group, a Pelhari representative, and a handful of station staff who looked very frightened. Everyone was pressed against the walls, staying clear of the center of the passage. Then Garrick came around the far corner with 6 Voreth soldiers behind him, full armor, weapons raised at a low carry, not pointing at anyone but ready. His crest was fully raised. His eyes were dark and burning. He stopped when he saw Dawoon. "Your people are safe?" Dawoon asked. He said it first before Garrick could speak. Garrick stared at him. The transport was not military. "I know, I saw." Dawoon's voice was level. "I am sorry." The word sorry seemed to land strangely on Garrick. He stared for another moment. Then his crest lowered just slightly. He stepped to the side of the corridor and his soldiers moved with him. The 2 groups stood on opposite walls. For a while no one spoke. They waited. Then Garrick turned his dark eyes on the human group, on their empty hands, on the absence of anything that looked like protection. His expression moved through something, contempt, habit, and settled back into something that might have been, if nothing else, honest. "Your people have no one to protect you," he said. His voice was quieter than usual, not mocking now, more like a statement of fact that bothered him. "You stand in a locked corridor during a weapons incident with nothing, not even a blade." Dawoon looked at Garrick's 6 armored soldiers, then back at Garrick. He said very quietly, "We have people to protect us. You just cannot see them." Garrick's crest moved. He did not respond. Rena had been watching Dawoon's face when he said it. He was not bluffing. She had seen people bluff. She had studied body language and speech pattern analysis for 3 years. Dawoon was not bluffing. He was stating something factual in the same tone he used when he told the kitchen staff how he wanted his eggs. She looked at Wusiak standing against the wall. He had his arms crossed. He looked relaxed. But she realized, watching him now, that in the time since they had entered the corridor his eyes had moved to every entry point at least twice. Both doors. The ventilation panel above the Muresi group. The station staff near the corner. She had thought he was looking around because he was nervous. She understood now that he was looking around because he was working. She looked at Bitna. Bitna was sitting on a low bench against the wall. She had a medical bag on her lap. She was looking at her hands. She looked like a tired doctor at the end of a long shift, unremarkable in every way. But Rena noticed that Bitna had not looked at her medical bag once. Her hands were resting on top of it, and her eyes had not moved to it because she did not need anything in it. and her eyes, Rena saw now, were not tired. They were very, very still. Then three things happened. A second alert came through the station system. A Sulek strike unit had been authorized to move inside the station, a breach of summit security rules, but in the chaos of lockdown, the authorization had slipped through a gap in the station's command structure. 7 Sulek soldiers, fully armed, came through the east door of the corridor. They saw the Voreth group. They saw the station staff. They saw the small, weaponless human delegation, and they made a decision based on what looked easiest. Their squad leader pointed at the human group and spoke in the Sulek common tongue. Wusiak translated quietly, his voice flat. They want our data cores as security. They're calling it insurance. The Sulek soldiers moved toward the human delegation. What happened next was very fast. Rena saw it, but she could not fully explain it afterward. It was not like anything she had expected. There was no drawn-out fight, no moment where weapons met weapons. It was over before the Voreth soldiers had even raised their guns. Dawoon moved first, one step to the side, one hand forward, and the squad leader was on the floor. The movement had looked almost gentle, like he was helping someone who had tripped. Then Wusiak, who had been standing against the wall looking bored, was no longer against the wall. 2 soldiers down, and Bitna, quiet, still, tired-looking Bitna, stood up from the bench and crossed the corridor in 4 steps and was not tired at all. 7 soldiers, 9 seconds, all of them on the ground, alive, breathing, restrained with the kind of efficiency that left no room for drama. No weapons had been drawn from the human side. No shots fired. Dawoon straightened the front of his jacket. He looked at the 7 Sulek soldiers on the floor with what looked like mild concern, the way someone might look at a spilled drink. Then he looked at the stunned faces around the corridor, the Muresi delegates with wide eyes, the station staff pressing against the walls, Garak standing completely still with his crest frozen halfway up. "We do appreciate the concern," Dawoon said pleasantly to no one in particular. "Shall we get back to the negotiations?" Rena stood very still. Bitna was already crouching beside the nearest Sulek soldier, checking his pulse with careful hands, medical hands. She looked once again completely unremarkable. Wusiak picked up his bag from where he had set it against the wall, put it back over his shoulder, and took out his tablet. One of the Sulek soldiers on the floor made a low, dazed sound. Bitna adjusted his head with a patient, professional care that was somehow the most frightening thing Rena had seen all day. Then Rena felt a hand on her arm. She turned. The Sulek intelligence officer, Jisoo, a female with compound eyes and a narrow face who Rena had spoken to briefly during the first-day reception, was gripping her wrist. Her compound eyes were wide in a way that made every small lens in them reflect the amber light. She leaned close and spoke in a low, fast whisper. "Child," she said, "do you have any idea what your civilization actually is?" Rena looked at her. Then she looked at Dawoon, who was already walking back toward the main hall, hands in his jacket pockets, humming something very quietly under his breath. She looked back at Jisoo. "Not yet," she said honestly, "but I'm starting to." Jisoo did not let go of Rena's arm right away. She pulled her into a side room off the main corridor, a small storage space used by station maintenance staff. The shelves were stacked with cleaning equipment and spare lighting panels. The amber lockdown light was still pulsing slowly through the gap under the door. Jisoo made sure they were alone. Then she turned to Rena with those wide compound eyes and spoke quickly, the way someone speaks when they have been waiting a long time to say something. She told Rena what the Sulek Intelligence Division knew, or rather, what they thought they knew, built from years of watching and collecting small pieces and trying to make them fit together. It had started with a low-level analyst who noticed something odd. Every human diplomat sent to any galactic summit had 2 official profiles. One was their public record, education, language skills, diplomatic history, the things anyone could read. The second profile was attached to a separate access system that required higher clearance to see. Not all alien intelligence services had gotten in. The Sulek had managed it once briefly, before the access closed. What they found did not make sense at first. Dawoon's public profile said he was a senior diplomat with 30 years of service. His secondary profile showed that before his diplomatic career, he had spent 12 years in a division of Earth's military that the Sulek database had almost nothing on. The division's name was listed in the file. The Sulek analysts had searched for it and found only 2 references, both very old, both in documents that had been heavily restricted. Wusiak, the linguist, had a doctorate in alien language studies. He had also completed a certification program in something that translated into the Sulek language as Advanced High-Pressure Contact Response. The analysts had not been sure what that meant until they watched security footage from a summit 4 years ago and saw Wusiak walk an armed Pelhari guard backward into a wall with one hand, while continuing a conversation in Pelhari with his other hand, apparently without breaking a thought. Bitna's public profile listed her as a medical doctor. Her secondary profile listed 17 additional certifications. 3 of them were medical, the other 14 were not. And those were the profiles they could see. The other 5 members of Earth's delegation had secondary profiles that were either missing entirely or locked behind access walls that the Sulek division had never been able to open. Jisoo told Rena all of this in a fast, tight whisper. Then she stopped and waited. Rena thought about it. She thought about the corridor. 9 seconds. She thought about Bitna's still eyes. She thought about the message on her comm unit. "They are not sending unarmed civilians," Rena said slowly. "No," Jisoo said, "they are not. They are sending people who are trained, who can fight, who just look like civilians." "Every cook in your kitchen has a military record," Jisoo said. "We checked your support staff, your administrative assistants, the woman who handles your delegation's media communications. She qualified as a combat specialist before she was 20 years old." Jisoo made a gesture with her narrow hands that seemed to express something between frustration and awe. "You do not send an unarmed delegation to peace summits. You send a delegation that has made itself look unarmed. There is a very large difference." Rena was quiet for a moment. Then her comm unit buzzed. She looked at it. A transmission request cleared to her security level, marked urgent, coming from a Geneva, Earth address. She accepted it. The screen showed a room. A plain room, gray walls, a single desk, a window with daylight coming through. At the desk sat a man named Junki. He was older, perhaps 60, with a careful face and the kind of posture that came from years of sitting very straight without thinking about it. He was wearing a plain dark jacket. He looked like someone's grandfather who worked in government. "Rena," he said, his voice was calm, "I understand you have been asking questions." "Yes," she said. "Good, you should have been briefed sooner." He laced his fingers on the desk. "I am going to tell you the true version of events, not the public version, the true one." He told her about the Dawnbreak Accords of 2251. When humanity had first been invited to the Galactic Communities Summit, no one had told Earth what the expected norms were. No one had explained that you were not supposed to bring your full military to a peace summit. The invitation had simply said, "Come, attend, meet the others." So Earth had come the way Earth always did anything important. They had sent diplomats, yes, but they had also sent an escort because their diplomats were traveling into unknown space to meet unknown civilizations for the first time, and so the escort had been what Earth considered reasonable under those circumstances. Earth had sent the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet, 17 warships, not their largest fleet, not even close, a medium escort, and with the fleet, a single strategic infantry division as a ground presence, standard protective detail. The combined military intelligence services of 11 civilizations had run their standard arrival assessment overnight on the first day. This was normal procedure. Every delegation analyzed every other delegation's military presence as a matter of course. By morning, the atmosphere inside the summit had completely changed. Junki explained what the assessments had found, not the classified details, but the shape of the reaction. 4 ambassadors had resigned and gone home without explanation. 2 civilizations had quietly begun drafting conditional surrender documents, not because war was coming, not because anyone had threatened them, but because they had run the numbers on what Earth's escort meant, and decided they wanted a pre-written response ready just in case. One small civilization had made a request to leave the mapped region of the galaxy entirely, citing a sudden need to explore elsewhere. The Vorath Dominion, 8 centuries of continuous warfare, 11 major campaigns, a species that had never surrendered to anyone, their ambassador had sent a single transmission to the Vorath High Command on the morning of Day 2. The message had been intercepted. It said in its entirety, "Do not provoke the humans. Under any circumstances, tell the fleet to stand down." The Vorath fleet, which had been running a patrol exercise 3 systems away, had stopped its exercises and held position. No human soldier had fired a shot. No threat had been made. No one had raised their voice. Earth's escort had simply arrived, and the math of what it represented had moved through the room like a cold wind, and every military mind in that summit had felt it. Junki paused. He let the silence sit for a moment. Then the galactic community, shaken, humbled, frightened in a way they had not expected, had come to Earth's diplomatic team with a request. Not a demand, not a negotiation. A quiet, careful, polite request delivered with great seriousness. They had asked humanity to please not bring its military to peace summits anymore. They had explained that it was not a question of fairness or rules. It was a question of function. A peace summit where one species' military presence caused every other species to feel, without any hostility intended, that they were outclassed, that the math did not work in their favor, that they were fundamentally outweighed. That was not a peace summit. That was a very politely conducted surrender ceremony, and you could not build a galactic community on surrender ceremonies. They had asked Earth to come to future summits as a civilian power, no military, no escort, to trust the neutral space and to trust the talks. And Earth's government, after a long discussion that Junki described simply as *complicated, had said yes. They had agreed to the request and kept it quiet and maintained it for 136 years. "We do not stay unarmed to seem weak," Junki said. His voice was even and clear. "We stay unarmed so the room stays a room, so others can speak without feeling like they have already lost before they have opened their mouths. A table where one side is genuinely frightened is not a peace table. We want a peace table." Rena looked at him for a long moment. "But you still send trained people," she said. "We send humans," Junki said. "Humans who have lived full lives and have various skills. Some of those skills are useful in difficult situations. That is simply what humans are." Something that was almost a smile crossed his calm face. "We were not asked to send helpless people. We were asked not to send an army." Rena thought about that. "Bitna," she said, "what is she actually?" Junki looked at her. The screen went dark. Rena stood alone in the small storage room with the amber light pulsing under the door. She stayed there for a while. She looked at the cleaning equipment on the shelves. She looked at the spare lighting panels. She thought about a galactic community sending a polite, frightened request. She thought about Earth saying yes. She thought about what it meant to be the largest thing in a room and to choose, deliberately and carefully, every single time to sit down. Then she picked up her bag and went back to work. The crisis ended quietly, the way most crises do when enough people decide they are tired of it. The Sulek warship that had fired on the Vorath transport was identified as acting outside its authorized orders. The Sulek hegemony's senior ambassador issued a formal statement within 2 hours calling the action a rogue decision made by a lower commander who had misread the situation. The Voreth transport had been damaged but not destroyed. Its crew were safe. The cease protocol violation was serious, but no life had been lost. The station lockdown was lifted by early evening. The 7 Sulek soldiers in the East Corridor were taken into station security custody. The official report described them as having been neutralized by unknown means before station security arrived. No footage was available. The corridor's camera panel had been temporarily offline during the lockdown. The report was filed. No one asked too many questions about it. Some things are easier that way. Dawoon's team worked through the night. Rena worked with them. She had gone back to the delegation quarters after her conversation with Junki and sat for a while, and then she had gotten up, made herself a cup of tea the way Dawoon always did, plain, no sweetener, and gone to find the others. Wusiak was already at the table with his notes spread in front of him. Bitna was reading a thin book. Dawoon looked up when Rena walked in and nodded once, as if he had expected her. They built the new framework through the night. The problem of the Drevak Nebula was not simple. 200 years of war had created 200 years of stories, and each side's story said they were right. You could not solve that with a map. You had to go around it. You had to find the place where both sides could stand without the story getting in the way. Dawoon found it at around 2 in the morning. He had been quiet for a long time, staring at the table, and then he had leaned forward and said, "What if the nebula belonged to neither side and both sides at once? Not shared territory that had been tried and failed. A jointly administered zone with a governing body made of equal representatives from both civilizations, with final authority sitting with a rotating third party." Wusiak immediately began checking whether the legal structures of both civilizations had any existing framework that could support this kind of arrangement. Rena started drafting the language. Bitna made everyone more tea and pointed out, very calmly, that the third paragraph of Rena's draft used a Sulek legal term that meant something slightly different in their old dialect and the modern one, and that using the old meaning would be more effective. Rena looked at her. Bitna looked back. Her expression was pleasant and mild. By morning they had a document. It was not a peace treaty that would take much longer, but it was a working proposal solid enough to go back to the table. The final session of the summit began at noon. Dawoon presented the framework. The room was different from the day before. The lockdown had taken something out of the air, some of the posturing, some of the performance. Everyone had spent the previous afternoon pressed against corridor walls in amber light, and it had made them all, for a short time, the same kind of frightened. When fear is the same, people become more equal. The Sulek ambassador Verk read through the proposal slowly. He asked 3 questions. Dawoon answered 2 of them and deferred the third to Rena, who had drafted that section and answered cleanly from memory. Garak read his copy. He was very still while he read. Then he set it down and looked at the table for a moment. Then he said, "We can work with this." 4 hours of discussion followed. Other delegations offered input. There were disagreements, real ones, not just the performative kind. The Murasi Compact raised a concern about the third-party rotation that took 40 minutes to work through. A Pelhari representative identified a gap in the enforcement language that Wusiak quietly fixed in real time, passing the corrected draft to Rena, who passed it to the table without interrupting the flow of conversation. At the end of the 4th hour, the framework was accepted as the basis for continued negotiation. It would go back to the home governments of both civilizations. It would take years to become anything permanent, but it would go back. And it would go back because the language was right and the structure was honest, and no one in that room felt like they had been backed into a corner. That was the whole work. That was what it had always been. The summit closed with a formal ceremony at sundown. Each delegation's senior representative signed the session record. Soldiers stood in their formation lines. Armor gleamed. The large hall was full and loud and bright. Dawoon signed for Earth. Rena stood beside him. Afterward, in the slow movement of people leaving the hall, Garak found them. He came alone, no soldiers. He walked across the floor with his great heavy steps and stopped in front of Dawoon, and for a moment he just stood there, which for a Voreth was already a kind of statement. His crest was flat. His eyes were quiet. "I owe you an apology," he said. His voice was low. It sounded like the words had some weight to them, like he had carried them for a while before putting them down. Dawoon waited. "I called your people clerks," Garak said. "I have said it at 3 summits, different words each time." He paused. "My grandfather was at the Dawnbreak Accords. He was part of the military escort, a junior officer. He never spoke of it, not once, my entire life. I always thought it meant nothing had happened there." His large throat moved. "I was told some things today. Not everything, some things." Dawoon nodded. "He could not find the words," Garak said. "That is why he never spoke of it. It was not nothing. He could just never find the words." Dawoon reached out and put his hand briefly on Garak's arm. The gesture was small, natural, the kind of thing you do with someone you have known a long time, even if you have not. "He should not have had to," Dawoon said quietly. "That was the whole point." Garak looked at him for a moment longer. Then he turned and walked away without another word, and Rena thought that for a very large creature who had spent the entire summit being loud, he left the room very gently. She stood beside Dawoon and watched the hall empty. The soldiers of 60 civilizations moved in their formations, weapons at their sides, armor polished and proud. She watched a Voreth on her guard march in perfect step. She watched the Sulek soldiers with their curved blades at their belts. She watched the Pelhari ceremonial guards in their silver. She watched Bitna cross the room toward them, medical bag over one shoulder, book tucked under her arm, looking exactly like a tired doctor at the end of a long trip. Bitna nodded at Rena and said they should get moving before the docking queue backed up. Rena watched her go. She watched those calm eyes tracking the room, automatic, patient, taking in every armed figure without any visible effort, the way your ears hear traffic noise without you deciding to listen. She thought about an old saying she had read once, somewhere, in a history book from before the space age. Something about speaking softly and carrying a large stick. She had always understood it as advice, a strategy. Bring power but do not announce it. But Earth had gone further than that. Earth had looked at that strategy and made a different choice. Earth had put the stick down, not because the stick was gone, not because they had forgotten where they left it, but because the room needed to be a room, and a stick in a room changes what the room is. She thought about what Junki had said. We stay unarmed so the room stays a room. She thought about Garak's grandfather, who had spent his whole life not being able to find the words. She thought about the 11-hour gap in the records, about the ambassadors who had gone home without explanation, about the civilization that had quietly asked to leave the mapped galaxy. All of that because Earth had shown up the normal way, because Earth had come as Earth came to things seriously, with preparation, without apology. And the greatest diplomatic decision in the history of humanity had not been a speech or a treaty or a victory in any traditional sense. It had been choosing every summit after that to walk through the door as if they were the smallest ones in the room, for 136 years, without being asked again, because they had been asked once, and they had understood what was being asked, and they had said yes. Not because they were afraid. Because they were not. Dawoon appeared at her shoulder. Docking queue starts in 20 minutes, he said. Bitna is right. I know, Rena said. She did not move yet. Dawoon stood beside her for a moment, looking out at the hall. You did good work this summit, he said. I mostly watched, she said. That is good work, he said, especially the first time. They walked out of the hall together, down the long corridor. through the docking gate and up the ramp of the UNSS Hopeful Dialogue, which was clean and white and carried no weapons and looked, to anyone who did not know better, like exactly what it appeared to be. The ship undocked from Nexus Orin without ceremony, without fanfare, without an armed escort. Its engines were quiet. Its hull showed